Hi, how are you doing today? Glad to be here at the 2021 ANA Data and Analytics Conference, still virtual. Hopefully next year that'll change. I know I'm looking forward to getting my vaccination and getting things more back to normal and seeing all of you in person again. But today I'm really excited to talk to you about an important topic and take us through some terminology we've seen being used more recently in the media space, along with some old subject matter and how those things come together along the subject lines of cross-channel attribution with federated data in the modern world of data privacy that we live in. This is a very real challenge that we need to overcome for both technical reasons and managerial ones. So I'm going to take us through that and hopefully provide some clarity and definition, some solutions, some risk and mitigation tactics, and offer some summary and conclusions. So let's jump right into motivation. Cross-channel marketing measurement or media measurement solutions are oriented towards being the underpinnings of a managerial operation system, and those are marketing or media organization wide in the way that we think about those things, from strategic planning down to tactical decision making. We are interested in doing enterprise resource planning and budgeting across the many different media investments, then being able to evaluate which media platforms are working best for us as advertisers and evolve our platform strategy as new media opportunities come along, and the audiences we aim to influence change where they consume media. A lot of what I'll talk about puts a new focus on cross-channel attribution and marketing impact measurement that takes very seriously the fact that media consumption is not a random phenomena. It's a behavior that's understood. A lot of times we think about that in isolation, but it's something that is right at the heart of the marketing impact measurement problem. And taking that seriously not only provides an opportunity to improve measurement, but it also provides an opportunity to solve some of these challenges in data federation that I'll talk about. But in a media operating system, you also need to make tactical decisions and have a solution that aligns with planning and optimizing that media investment with the right sort of tactics to influence the audiences that are most valuable to the business's key performance indicators. So this is just a big picture view of what we're trying to achieve here. Some more motivation is that there are practical data challenges. Talked a little bit about this before here at the ANA and other places, that there's a high degree of uncertainty in the availability of data and what that looks like. So where data may be available on a continuous basis, what that data looks like tends to change quite often, and it's pretty volatile. And those are driven by three main forces. We think generally one is household privacy and consumer demands around their privacy, and their ability to control that privacy is becoming stronger. There's more solutions for that, and that means that it'll drive uncertainty in data availability with that further control. Firms with market power also control data that lives within their walls. Think of them as walled gardens, and it's a source of market power that drives margin and performance in their own businesses, and it's strategically important to their competitive position and sensible that they would make use of that in driving the performance of their own businesses. But it means that as advertisers, access to such data is often difficult, and I'll talk about that in the case of some major digital media advertising opportunities further in the presentation. Also, we've seen a number of legislative actions in government at the state, national, and internationally in countries other than the United States that is limiting the ability to record and share data about individuals. So what do we do is a big question about those challenges. I suggest that there's a lot of opportunities. That's what I'm going to talk about. Confinement is the next big challenge. These various challenges that are brought about by uncertainty means that there's zero to limited access about the data behind the media investments that are being made, limited ability to consolidate that data for enterprise resource planning and other sort of operational things that you like to have data drive means that that's going to be a challenge and keeps everything consolidated. That's why the consolidated confinement picture below there. Incompatibility is the third. Prevailing solutions for measuring impact measurement, media impact, like mix modeling, ignore consumer media consumption. Those things are never talked about in those sort of studies. And, also ignore targeting required for media planning and unbiased measurement. They're assumed away, often in the form of regression model, where the key assumption is that the explanatory variables are independent and random, which, as I alluded to earlier, just isn't the case. Media consumption isn't random and media targeting isn't random. Very strategic and behavior-based. Touch attribution requires media exposure identity resolution. That's what's going away here. So, these historical methods for having data about a touch point and the timestamp of that touch point is largely going away. But it doesn't mean that touch attribution is dead, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But we can't rely on the old methods, and it was always a limitation that such attribution methodologies that relied so heavily on identity resolution did omit certain media that identity resolution wasn't available for. Exposure, resolving an exposure to an individual, to be clear. So let me take a minute to define data federation. This is a term that's used in many different contexts, and it's quite a general term, but data federation is an aspect of data virtualization. Well, that means just making data accessible for managerial use cases, where the data stored, it's heterogeneous, very different. All the different data has different schemas, different aggregation levels. You can, imagine that data in different parts of the organization and that's coming from outside, third parties can be very different. And those data stores, where that data is stored is autonomous, but that it's made accessible to data consumers as one integrated thing. So if you think about a cross-channel solution, that's exactly what it's doing. It's dealing with data that's very disparate, many different sources, and bringing it together in a useful form in one place for managerial decision support. So I wanted to couch this in the context of walled gardens and data hubs. This is more applicable to other areas where data is more or less accessible, but a very important example is in the case of walled gardens. So a number of major media platforms, I list three of them here, but certainly not limited to these three. These three would be most interesting to focus on. They have they're working on data hub products that give advertisers access. So you may have access to one of these products or maybe planning on it, but essentially this gives you access to data that lives at a user level but is not accessible by you as an advertiser at the user level. So I talk a little bit about the screen rule there, where when you pull data from the sort of data store, you have to aggregate at least 50 user IDs in those queries. So Google has a product named Ads Data Hub. It relies on cloud infrastructure, Google Cloud Platform. BigQuery is a querying product. And when you do a query, it checks to make sure that you've aggregated at least 50 users. You can do all sorts of aggregations. And as I'll talk in a little bit, you can put data into the Ads Data Hub, first-party data or data from other places potentially that are also partners with Ads Data Hub, to bring all that data together in one place. But it's focused media that is served in terms of the media data that lives in there natively. It is the media served by Google Campaign Manager, but it also includes things like YouTube and Google Ads sort of media that weren't always historically available at a very detailed level. So that's a benefit of having a product like this. Amazon is coming on strong with their Amazon Marketing Cloud. You access this through various AWS products, as you might imagine. My best understanding is they too have a 50 user screen rule, and the media data focus is Amazon advertising. Facebook is in beta with Facebook Insights sort of product that they've publicly announced, and some advertisers are working with, and to the best of my knowledge relies on Facebook internal infrastructure. And the screen rule historically was a little bit lower at 30. I'm not fully sure what they're experimenting with in terms of how many users you need to aggregate, but this is Facebook media is the data focus there. So there are these various hubs. Many advertisers are investing across all these different platforms, and how do you bring that data together and use it for the sort of managerial use cases of resource planning that were discussed earlier. So there's basically 3 different approaches. This might not be exhaustive, but it's basically what I've seen. And most of what I've seen are what I'd call intuitive approaches. And one is inductive, meaning it looks at things from a little bit different side of the problem. So I'll take us through these. One is that, as I alluded to earlier, you can actually inject your first-party data or other data sources into the data hub and join that data using PII or some onboarding partner within the data hub. You can join the data and then pull the data out through aggregation. It makes it harder to use various methods for measuring marketing impact. It's certainly possible within some of these cloud-based products. They have utilities, different machine learning and data science standard libraries that can be used within the data hubs, but certainly, limited to those sort of libraries that aren't always oriented towards the marketing impact use case. But alas, you are putting data into the hub, and there's always, as secure as it may be as a privacy sandbox, there's always some sort of question about security once it leaves your walls. You give up on cross-channel measurement, right, to the extent that there's certain media, say other walled gardens, that you can't put in there. You've given up on that cross-channel measurement. And then any sort of measurement or consolidation or composition across the different channels is something you do in the post hoc fashion. You're not really, controlling for the interaction of media in measurement of the impact, for example. So it's still very solitary confinement sort of setup. The second intuitive approach is to extract aggregate data from the hubs at that 50 user sort of level, and give up on the idea of touch attribution and use some sort of more granular mixed solution or some sort of attribution type solution, attribution without touch, right? A timestamp to the exposure basically means, finer measurement of marketing impact of tactics, and, sequentially bring those things together, bottom into top. Typically, it could be top into bottom, depending on how you want to constrain measurement, either with mixed modeling or an attribution sort of solution. You might hear these things now being described as econometric models mixed with machine learning. It just means the same thing, right? Mixed modeling with some sort of attribution scheme, and it is brought together in separate parts and composed together. Finally, an inductive, less intuitive sort of solution is to say, all right, we'll do the extraction of the aggregate data from the hub. So we have data that is aggregate. It's micro aggregate data, so much finer granularity than we would typically use, say, in a mixed study. And then rely on a modeling solution that fuses consumer exposure and response together. So this is the first time we're saying, oh, exposure matters here. We need a model of exposure because it is a non-random phenomenon, and that model of exposure needs to be incorporated within the marketing impact measurement model. It lives within it, inside of it, because the marketing impact measurement model is measuring the impact of those exposures on some KPI. So the example I have here, just to distinguish it from a composition, say, of ingredients, is really to polymerize. Like if you've ever done any study in polymer chemistry, you understand that the underlying structures are the same, but they link together to form something more homogeneous, like an epoxy or a nylon or these sort of things, rubber in say the natural world, various polymers. And that's really what we're looking for. It's strong, it's consistent, and it deals with the fact that those underlying elements are consumers that make decisions, and there's timing of exposure and conversion that's attached to that, and that's super important. And throwing that out the window isn't particularly helpful for planning, and it certainly makes a measurement harder. So what are the risks? Giving myself a time check here. Apologize. Joining first or third party with identifiers has limited viability for measurement, especially as the ability to do personal identification goes away, or it moves into a new market where those things can be distorted by recruitment or just overall match rates. Those things are pretty hindered at this current period of time. Media planning, isolates analysis and introduces, waste when you're not considering the interactive effects of media and the opportunity that brings. Experimentation is a way to control for, that neglected brand media interaction. So where you are able to do more random experiments, these can be costly. They will mitigate the impact of that interaction of media in the wild. The risk around the second intuitive approach is that privacy filters change aggregation levels quite often, and not having a foundational atomic structure to build your understanding of exposure and impact up from means that you're always trying to model data at the level that you have the data. So you think about it more as a data modeling exercise rather than a consumer modeling exercise. That's really what is inductive about the inductive approach. It says, I'm not modeling data, I'm modeling consumers. The same way we understand, polymer structures to be, underlying common element that builds up the things based on their similarity. You because you don't have the ability to predict exposure, you get less of that audience texture, the journey, sequence, and timing of media exposure that's pretty critical to planning and optimizing that journey and path down the funnel, and the investment in brand, intermediate activities like web visits, to ultimate, bottom of the funnel conversion sort of KPIs. To remediate this using consistent methods, right? Using experimentation to deal with, the omitted variable problems that are inherent in mixed modeling and in an MTA, help to improve measurement. And you'll need additional solutions for consumer audience insights that relate to things about journey, sequence, and timing. In the inductive approach, it's hard to do without software for this federation during impact measurement. That's where the federation is happening. You have the different data sources, you extract them, and you bring them back down to the consumer level, by virtue of the underlying, belief about where the data comes from, the consumer response, and what you can learn about consumers from these, what we call microaggregate signals. It's still the same data, just more efficient to use. So as we do lose information at the user level, you'll want to leverage, financially smart experimentation to enhance that information content, right? So the way I always suggest thinking about experimentation is an investment in data. It's not a method for measurement. It's an investment in the sort of data or the information that you need to make a measurement. And the same applies here. So in summary, introduced 3 practical data challenges that all data-driven advertisers invested in walled garden media platforms are facing. Defined data federation for those of us that the term is new for, and then couch that in the context of cross-channel impact measurement, which is certainly a federation of data for decision support and enterprise resource planning. Reviewed 3 approaches for federating, walled garden data with first party and other data sources, and identified some risk and remediation paths. So here's the bottom line in conclusion. The intuitive approaches, don't really overcome those data confinement and compatibility challenges because they ignore consumer behavior is essentially what's going on. Or the inductive approach actually addresses both of the issues and further reduces the risk resulting from volatile data, the fact that it's always changing, the levels of aggregation that are going to be available to address data privacy concerns and the various data privacy policies that exist either within firms or governments that the data is being collected within. So something that's robust to that, right, and has the strength of a polymer, as I say, is the recommended approach. So I thank you for taking the time to hear about cross-channel impact measurement in the federated data world, and look forward to talking to you more about it.